This 5-color deck wants to cast big mana spells on the cheap through the use of Golos' activated ability. We want to activate Golos' ability as frequently as possible, and not just during our turn. For the purposes of maximizing this value engine, various untap effects and flash enablers are included in the 99 in order to utilize Golos' ability during our opponent's turns without fear of timing restrictions. In addition to these features, numerous mana ramp effects are present in the deck in order to get the biggest bang for our mana bucks. There are dozens of spells with mana values equal to or higher than the 7 mana needed to activate Golos. Casting multiple spells in this way multiple times during a round of turns will lead to an eventual overwhelming board state at which time any number of our sorcery, creature, and/or enchantment spells will win the game.
Golos, Tireless Piligrm is a 3/5 legendary artifact creature for 5 mana. When Golos enters the battlefield, we may search our library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle our library. Then, at instant speed, we may pay 2 and Wooburg colors to exile the top 3 cards of our library. We may play them this turn without paying their mana costs. On September 13th, 2021, Golos, Tireless Piligrm was banned in the EDH format. For those of you who have metagames or playgroups or LGSs that would still allow Golos to be a commander, this deck tech is for you since we are participating in a casual format. However, if you're my playgroup or my metagame, unfortunately, this will not come to pass. So, for those who are looking at this as a deck tech for the future, this is Golos Tireless Piligrm. For MTG Burgeoning, this is a Requiem to one of the most powerful 5-color commanders in the history of our game. The following group of cards is going to be referred to as our big mana spells. Each of the following 24 cards have a CMC of at least 7, which is the exact amount of mana needed to activate Golos' ability. We want to make sure we see these cards frequently at the top of our library because we want the most bang for our mana buck. And we're going to begin with Brilliant Ultimatum. 2 white, triple blue, and double black, we exile the top 5 cards of our library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, and we may cast any number of cards from one of those piles without paying their mana costs. So if we're fortunate enough to exile one of these cards as a result of activating Golos' ability, then this could lead to additional spells. Who knows? It could be 2, it could be 3, depending on the game states, depending on the board state, depending on the ability to politic at the EDH table. Perhaps this leads to every possible spell being cast in the direction of a player that is so far ahead in the game. Either way, Brilliant Ultimatum is one of the best cards we can pop off of Golos because it could lead to so many more spells. Big mana spell number 2, we have Captive Audience. For 5 and Rakdos colors, this ETB's under the control of an opponent of our choice. And at the beginning of that opponent's upkeep, they choose one that hasn't been chosen. Either their life total becomes 4, either they discard their hand, or each of that player's opponents creates 5 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Wherever this lands, on whichever part of the EDH table it is, chances are that without removal, it will end up crippling that opponent. Number 3, we are up to our first creature of the big mana spells, and this is Elesh Norn, the Grand Cenobite. 5 and double white for this 4/7 Praetor. It has Vigilance. It gives other creatures we control +2/+2, and creatures our opponents control get -2/-2 as well. A great static way to keep the battlefield clear of all potential tribes and token creatures while buffing some of our own token creatures that we will see later on in this deck tech. Big mana spell number 4, Emergent Ultimatum. Double black, triple green, double blue. We search our library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards. We shuffle that card into our library, and we may cast the other cards without paying their mana costs. And then we exile Emergent Ultimatum. So similar to Brilliant Ultimatum, this is one card that could lead to 2 more. And again, as we also said with Brilliant Ultimatum, Emergent Ultimatum also has the potential for a little politicking at the EDH table, particularly if the entire board state is slanted in favor of one of our opponents. Big mana spell number 5, we have Mind's Dilation, 5 and double blue. This enchantment reads, whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of their library. If it's a non-land card, we may cast it without paying its mana cost. You're going to see woven into this deck a theme of getting one card off of Golos that can lead to many, many other cards. We've already seen that with Brilliant Ultimatum, we've seen that with Emergent Ultimatum, and now with Mind's Dilation, every single first spell that our opponents cast each turn could lead to another spell that we cast for free. All right, number 6, making it to the 1/4 mark. We have Nyx Bloom Ancient, 4 and triple green for a 5/5 elemental with trample. If we tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So if we pull the Nyx Bloom Ancient down a little bit to reveal the activated ability of our so beloved general, 2 and Woobird colors. If we have the mana to pay for that, and we have a Nyx Bloom Ancient in play, guess what? We are activating Golos 3 times, which means we're getting 9 cards off the top of our library. And let's face it, folks, it's only a matter of time until we end up winning that game. All right, sticking with the CMC 7, we have Sheoldred Whispering One, 5 and double black for a 6/6 Praetor with Swamp Walk. At the beginning of our upkeep, we return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Love the second ability on Sheoldred, because when an opponent has to sacrifice a creature, that dances around Shroud, that dances around Hexproof, it dances around Indestructible, it scurries right past Indestructible and Protection. If I've already said that, that's just how good Sheoldred Whispering One is. And admittedly, there are not a high number of creatures in this deck. However, the creatures that are in this deck are extremely powerful. So if we're able to bring one from our graveyard to the battlefield just by having Sheoldred under our control, she could be considered one of the most powerful creatures in the 99. All right, hitting the 1/3 mark, another CMC of 7, we have Ruinous Ultimatum, another ultimatum. This is our 3rd ultimatum so far. 2 red, 3 white, 2 black, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. Yes, this won't do anything if those permanents are indestructible. Yes, this could be considered not as powerful as an option when we're talking about the mana invested. I mean, if we're investing a total of 7 mana, technically, we could make the case that Cyclonic Rift would be the better play. However, all of those non-land permanents go to our opponent's hands. Absent indestructibility, these permanents are going to the graveyard because Ruinous Ultimatum will send them right there. And it's a lot more difficult to get cards from the graveyard back into hands and the battlefield than it is to just simply replay the cards replay the cards sent to our hands, sent to the hands of our opponents by Cyclonic Rift. So as I continue to stumble over my words as a way in which to convince you that Ruinous Ultimatum is the better play here when talking about the potential of what Cyclonic Rift can do, yes, this is also at sorcery speed. However, we have a little package that we'll introduce later in this video that will show how Ruinous Ultimatum could be, well, even better. All right, next up in another CMC 7, we have Thought Reflection, 4 and triple blue. If we would draw a card, we draw 2 cards instead. We want to make sure that we can have cards in our hands, and we want to make sure that we can use those cards to slow down our opponents, disrupt what they're doing so that we can get Golos into play, set up our mana base, activate his ability, and win the game. And our last CMC 7 card, coming in at the number 10 spot, we have Zendikar Resurgent. 5 and 2 green for an enchantment. Whenever we tap a land for mana, we add 1 mana to our mana pool of any type that land produced. And whenever we cast a creature spell, we draw a card. So we keep cards in our hand, we ramp our mana, and let's face it, you're going to continuously see ways in which that we can make more and more mana so that we can activate Golos' abilities as many times as possible. Zendikar Resurgent will help keeping our hand full, and it will also help to power out those activations of Golos. All right, our first CMC of 8, and it follows in the line of Brilliant Ultimatum, Emergent Ultimatum, and Mind's Dilation, and that is Aminatu's Augury. What may be one of the most underrated sorceries in the game. We have this spell, 6 and 2 blue mana. We exile the top 8 cards of our library. We may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Notice, it does not say it has to be tapped. Until end of turn, for each non-land card type, we may cast a card of that type from among the exile cards without paying its mana cost. So just to review, we can get a land into play untapped, and then we can cast a creature. We can cast an artifact. We can cast an enchantment, an instant, a sorcery. There are no planeswalkers included in this deck, so that will not help us. However, this could lead to potentially playing 6 total cards. To me, that is win-win every single time. Aminatu's Augury continues the trend of trying to get 1 card off of Golos that can produce many, many more. Next CMC of 8, we have Army of the Damned. 5 and triple black. We create 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens tapped. Wonderful. What could be better? Well, how about casting this with Golos for free, sending it to the graveyard, and then flashing it back for 7 and 3 black mana? Very, very good spell. This is one of our win conditions if we're talking about winning through combat. Army of the Damned, coupled with Elesh Norn, can give us an army of 4/4 black zombie creatures that will be very difficult for our opponents to overcome. Particularly if we also have the following creature in play, also with a mana value of 8. That is Avacyn, Angel of Hope. 5 and triple white. She's an 8/8 legendary angel. She has flying, she has vigilance, she has indestructible. She has it all, MTG BC. She has it all. She has so much of it that she's willing to donate and make sure that our other permanents that we control also have indestructible. Avacyn presents a lot of problems on the battlefield, and if you've ever played a game with her or against her, you know exactly how powerful she can be. All right, our next CMC of 8 and our last of this category. It's another enchantment, but this time it is an Aura Curse. For 6 and 2 white, let's talk about Overwhelming Splendor. All right, when this comes into play, we enchant a player. Creatures enchanted player controls lose all abilities and have base power and toughness of 1/1. So they're all just vanilla 1/1 creatures if this enchantment is cursed on that player. Or we could say if this curse is enchanted on that player. I guess we can go either way with that one. Also, enchanted player can't activate abilities that aren't mana abilities or loyalty abilities. This card can be crippling, very similar to what we talked about with Captive Audience. A player that gets cursed by Overwhelming Splendor, particularly if they're playing a creature-heavy deck, a tribal deck, tokens, that could be a very, very big blow to their hopes of winning that game. All right, next up, we are going to CMC of 9, and we have in Garruk's Wake. 7 and 2 black, destroy all creatures we don't control, and destroy all planeswalkers we don't control. Mass removal that targets just our opponents for their creatures and planeswalkers. Sign me up. I'll take that every day of the week and twice on Friday Night Magic. And I have to believe that at some point in time, one of the cards inspired in Garrick's Wake's creation, maybe this card way back from the days of Prophecy, and that is Plague Wind. Plague Wind is in Garrick's Wake without the Planeswalkers, except these creatures cannot be regenerated. I don't know if regeneration is one of those mechanics that makes a presence in your metagame, your playgroup, or your LGS. However, it doesn't mind, and Plague Wind is a great way, well, let me reframe that. Plague Wind was a great way to keep the battlefield clear and make sure that Golos could be on it without receiving any type of threat, from those creatures that say tap to destroy target creature, tap to return target creature to its owner's hand. Plague Wind will be a great way to make sure that the battlefield is clear, so we don't have to worry about that when we get our legendary scout out there into play. All right, and our last CMC of 9 for this segment of the deck tech, it is Zacama Primal Calamity. We got a 9/9 Elder Dinosaur for 6 in Naya colors. It has Vigilance, it has Trample, and it has Reach. And when it enters the battlefield, if we cast it, we untap all lands we control. And we're just going to slide Zacama down for a moment as we showcase what Golos Tireless Piligrm does. It does say you may play them without paying their mana costs. That means we cast it. So if we pump in the mana into Golos, and one of the 3 cards that we exile is Zacama, we will cast Zacama for free, we will untap all of those lands, and we're going to activate Golos again. Zacama by himself, or Zacama by themselves, I guess I should say. 2 in a red, it deals 1 damage to target creature. 2 in a green, we destroy target artifact or enchantment. 2 in a white, we gain 3 life. Zacama is extremely powerful, particularly in a deck that wants to try to abuse untapping lands so that we continuously abuse the activated ability of our general. All right, CMC of 10. Our first one is Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. 12/12 Eldrazi for 10 mana. When we cast Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, we draw 4 cards. Again, what we just said about Zacama, we're casting these creatures, so we're going to get the benefits of Kozilek's cast trigger. It also has Annihilator 4, which means whenever this creature attacks, defending player will sacrifice 4 permanents. More beneficial than even maybe the Annihilator trigger is when Kozilek hits the graveyard, we shuffle our entire graveyard into our library. That will be a great way to reset some of the big spells that we've already cast with Golos, or some of the big mana creature spells that got sent to the graveyard. We get them back into our library for another go with our commander. Next up, another mana value of 10, we have Progenitus. Double Wooburg for a 10/10 Hydra avatar with the 3 greatest words in the game of Magic: protection from everything. If Progenitus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, we reveal Progenitus and put it into our libraries, or shuffle it into our library instead. So short of exile, which, let's be honest, it's going to have to be a mass exiling spell, Progenitus is going to stick, it's going to cost some damage, and if it ends up dying, it's going right back into the library, awaiting to be, quote-unquote, cast again through the activation of a Golos ability. All right, CMC 10, spell number 3, we have Stormherd. 8 and double white for a sorcery that says we create X 1/1 white Pegasus creature tokens with flying, where X is our life total. So we can cast this, and maybe we're lucky and fortunate enough to also have a Lesh Norn in play, and we just created hopefully dozens of 3/3 flying Pegasus creatures that we can use as a win condition for the game. All right, our last mana value 10 spell, and it is Time Stretch. Now, I'm going to stop right here to preface that I am fully aware that there could be inordinately warped and deranged versions of Golos where the 99 is inundated with extra turn spells. I'm assuring you right now, this is the only extra turn spell in the 99. 8 and 2 blue mana for this sorcery. Target player takes 2 extra turns after this one. Although it does say target player, I have not ever cast this allowing any of my opponents to take 2 extra turns. It's always been me, because it's always been about Golos. Again, if you are looking to modify, strengthen, or enhance a Golos build that's featured extra turns, this is not going to be the 99 for you. All right, we're in the home stretch here. We have just 3 cards remaining of our big mana spells, and they're all colorless. Starting off with a CMC of 11, we have Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, a 10/10 Eldrazi for 11 mana. When we cast Ulamog, we destroy target permanent. Ulamog is indestructible. It also has Annihilator 4, and similar to Kozilek, when it's put into a graveyard from anywhere, we shuffle our graveyard into our library. So most of what we said about Kozilek is true for Ulamog as well, particularly with the benefit of getting our entire graveyard back into our library. All right, 2 up. This one, a CMC of 12. It is the Blightsteel Colossus. Again, similar to what I said when we talked about Time Stretch. If you are looking for the Infect-specific build of Golos, this is not it. We have 1 Infect spell in the entire 99, very similar to the extra turn spells. Just 1 little presence, a little sampling, and that is all. Blightsteel Colossus is an 11/11 golem with trample and infect for 12 mana. It is also indestructible. If Blightsteel Colossus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, we reveal it and shuffle it into our library instead. So it definitely has the progenitus effect. You're going to see that very, very much highlighted in these first 24 big mana spells, because we want to make sure that we get some of the very best cards back into the library if by some reason they get sent to the graveyard. 11/11 Infect, it has to hit once unimpeded, and even if there's a chump blocker with a toughness of 1, Blightsteel Colossus is going to send that player to a good game. And our last big mana spell, number 24, with a CMC of 13, you knew it was only a matter of time until we brought out Emrakul, the Promised End. A 13/13 Eldrazi for 13. Emrakul costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in our graveyard. A nice benefit to have if we end up drawing Emrakul. However, we're really hoping that we can just exile Emrakul with Golos' activated ability. When we cast Emrakul, we gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn, and then after that turn, that player takes an extra turn. And for anyone that's ever pulled this ability off with Emrakul or have had it done to them, you know how detrimental it could be to have some opponent come over and just completely wreck your hand, completely wreck your board. Emrakul's ability to take an opponent's turn is extremely powerful. Also, she's flying, she's trample, and she's protection from instants. Emrakul, the Promised End, thank you for being big mana spell number 24. The following group of cards we're just going to simply label as miscellaneous spells. A good portion of these spells are included as a way in which to enhance Golos' activated ability. We also have a little bit of a flash package included in this round of spells as a way in which to cast all of the spells exiled by Golos at any point during the game. Darn you, timing restrictions! Alright, so let's get to our first miscellaneous spell, and that's going to be Enlightened Tutor. Instant speed for 1 white mana. We search our library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal that card, shuffle our library, and put that card on top of it. As you saw from our previous spot, those 24 big mana spells, there were quite a number of enchantment spells included, in addition to 1 big old potentially game-ending artifact creature spell for one of our opponents. So, by casting Enlightened Tutor when we have Golos all set up, we can search our 99 for the best card to put on there, and then just wait for Golos to exile it, and then we cast that bad boy for free. Enlightened Tutor is card 1. Card 2, Mystical Tutor. Everything we said about Enlightened Tutor is the same for Mystical Tutor, except we swap out artifacts and enchantment for instants and sorcery spells. For the purposes of what we looked at with the previous 24 cards, we can probably think that Mystical Tutor is going to fetch up one of those beefy sorceries so that we can activate Golos' ability and feast on the goodies that that spell ends up giving us. All right, next miscellaneous spell, and one that you may not think would be inordinately helpful. However, with the big mana that we can include in this deck, this is a spell that could be just game-breaking. It's Mystic Speculation. It's a sorcery for 1 blue that lets us scry 3. And if you're unfamiliar with scry, that means that we can look at the top 3 cards of our library, and then we can put any number of them on the bottom of our library and the rest on top in any order. What's more important than that, however, is the little line of text above Scry 3 that says Buyback 2, which means we may pay an additional 2 mana when we cast the spell, and if we do, we can put this card into our hand after it resolves. So if we have the mana available, and we should once you see what we have in store for the ramp section of this deck, we should be able to use Mystic Speculation as a way in which to fatten up the top of our library so that we can prime it for a game-ending Golos activation. Another way in which, in case we're looking for something that we need in our hand from the, if the board state is calling for some kind of spot removal or something like that, the ability to scry those cards to the top or get rid of some lands to the bottom, Mystic Speculation will allow us to filter the top of our library to make sure that Golos can hit, and hit as hard as possible. Another miscellaneous spell that's only going to cost 1 mana, that's going to be Vampiric Tutor. Now, unlike Enlightened Tutor and unlike Mystical Tutor, there's going to be no restriction as to what the card is. It's going to cost us 2 life, but we're going to go through our library and pick any single card we want to put on top of it. Vampiric Tutor, welcome to the 99. All right, and our last 1 CMC miscellaneous spell, you guessed it, if you saw the Enlightened Tutor, and you saw the Mystical Tutor, and there's the Vampiric Tutor, and it was only a matter of time until we pulled out Worldly Tutor. 1 green mana, we search our library for a creature card, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put that card on top of it. Again, we don't have a ton of creatures bouncing around the 99 of this deck. However, the ones that we do, particularly the ones you saw in the previous segment during the big mana spells, any one of them would make a very prime candidate for a free cast off of a Golos activated ability. All right, CMC of 2, here we go. And, well, if we've already got 4 tutors, we might as well add a 5th tutor. Demonic Tutor, the best tutor in the format. And I think maybe now, around this point probably, you're beginning to see why the metagame, the playgroup, the LGS said no, even though EDH is considered a casual format. If Golos is banned, we're keeping him banned. You can no longer play with the Golos deck. So, Demonic Tutor, it was so much fun casting you in preparation for what we were going to do things with Golos. Alas, it is no longer meant to be. All right, next and last CMC2 for the miscellaneous slots, we have a Lightning Greaves. All right, it's an artifact. It costs 2, it equips for 0, it gives the equipped creature haste and shroud, and it makes a beeline right towards Golos as soon as we get Golos onto the battlefield. Now, unfortunately, for the need to protect Golos, Golos is not just a creature. Golos is an artifact creature. So for any of those spot removal spells that says destroy target artifact, bury target artifact, do something bad to target artifact, well, that can also target our commander. So including Lightning Greaves, they're going to have to go through the Greaves first to get to Golos. All right, CMC of 3, and another way to keep our hand filled with the cards that we may need to answer our opponents. Let's tax them to death. Rhystic Study, 2 and a blue enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, we draw a card unless that player pays 1. You're going to pay 1 for that? You're going to pay 1 for that? You're going to pay 1 for that? Oh, yeah, you know the drill, baby. You know how Rhystic Study works. All right, last miscellaneous spell with a mana value of 3. It is Eternal Witness. 1 and 2 green for a 2/1 human shaman. When it ETBs, we return target card from our graveyard to our hand. This can act as a chump blocker, but more importantly, this is regrowth on a stick, and we can recur it very easily with the other cards and effects and spells in this 99 of this deck. All right, next up we are moving to the 4 CMC spot. The 4 CMC spot, 2 spells, both of which are going to help us enhance exactly what we want Golos to do during a game. The first is going to be Vidalcan Orrery. It's an artifact for 4. We may cast non-land cards as though they had flash. With this in play, we can utilize Golos' activated ability at any point during the game, which also means that if it's one of our opponent's turns and we activate Golos and we exile 2 sorceries and a creature, because we have Vidalcan Orrery in play, we can cast all 3 of them right then and there. If we did not have a Vidalcan Orrery in play, or we did not have anything that can enable flash, and we activated Golos' ability on one of our opponent's turns, and we turn up sorcery, creature, they all just stay in exile. They're fizzled, they're gone because of the timing restrictions. However, Vidalcan Orrery says, let's change that. That's why it's included in the miscellaneous of this deck. Also in the 4 spot, and hopefully in our opening hand, we have Leyline of Anticipation. It does exactly what Vidalcan Orrery does, so it gives us some flash redundancy. Additionally, if it's in our opening hand, we get to put it into play for free when the game starts. Redundancy of flash in this deck is paramount, and we're not done adding things that can give our spells flash. I cannot stress enough for anyone who is going to help to refine, enhance, or strengthen a Golos deck that they can still play with at their EDH table. The flash is so important because that lets you control the entire game. You can do Golos' ability at any time during any player's turn. Flash is cash. All right, CMC of 5. And this edition is a bit of a backup plan. And because Golos could be such a lightning rod for attention, including this creature will help us to still get some things done in the game, on the battlefield, in the graveyard, in our hand, with our life total, if Golos just gets to be too popular. And what I'm meaning with that is this deck is going to have big time mana ramp, as you're going to see very shortly. And if Golos is, starting to get to the economical ends of not making it good to cast anymore, then we can turn to Kenrith the Returned King. Kenny, 4 and a white for a 5/5 legendary human noble. Tap a red, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. A white and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. 2 and a white, target player gains 5 life. 3 and a blue, target player draws a card. 4 and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So with everything that we have included in this deck from the purposes of ramping and getting out the huge big mana spells, Kenrith is plan B if for some reason Golos goes awry. And our last miscellaneous spell, and one that we can consider being a win condition in the deck, just based on the number of non-creature spells that we've already showcased, and that's going to be Shark Typhoon. 5 and a blue enchantment. We could cycle this for X, 1 and a blue, and when we do, we draw a card and we create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. I know it's tempting to do that, but don't. Save the Shark Typhoon so that you can have it out onto the battlefield, so that you can create these monstrous flying shark tokens off of activations from Golos' ability, and use those shark tokens as a win condition. Shark Typhoon is inordinately powerful in this deck. I promise you, you will not be disappointed, not only including it in the 99, but making sure that you do not cycle it away. The next group of spells are going to be referred to as our removal and disruption spells. These are the spells that we're going to turn to if we really need to interact with our opponent's boards. and stop them or prevent them or just slow them down a bit so that we can make sure that we can set up our Golos engine. And the first card, of course, if we're playing white, we have to include Swords to Plowshares. 1 white mana at instant speed, exile a creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. We don't care. Gain the life, because Golos is going to make sure you lose that life very quickly thereafter. And of course, if we're playing white and we have Swords to Plowshares, which is probably the best removal spell in the format, then we have to play with 1B, and that is Path to Exile. Again, instant speed for 1 white mana, and again, we exile target creature. Now this time, we gift our opponent with a basic land into play tapped, and I am not one that likes to help out opponents, particularly by getting them ahead on lands. However, sometimes trading a troublesome or problematic creature for a tapped basic land is justified. It really is. And sometimes maybe you're lucky and the opponent won't even have a basic land in the 99. Alright, so we have 2 instant speed creature removal spells for just 1 mana. And each of the following removal spells are going to target any permanent. And that's going to be very important just because of the versatility and the low cost that each of these spells have. Assassin's Trophy. Black and a green, destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Yes, just like Path to Exile, they get to search their library for a basic land and put it into play, this time untapped. However, I can promise you, sometimes making the trade for a overpowered artifact, perhaps, or maybe a planeswalker that's about to ult and win the game, you won't mind giving that player a basic land by Assassin's Trophying one of their permanents. Next up, and the first of our 4 remaining CMC with 3 spells, we have Anguished Unmaking. 1 in Orzhov colors, we exile target non-land permanent, and we lose 3 life. Trust me, the 3 life is not going to matter. We start with 40. Beast Within, 2 and a green, destroy target permanent. This hits any permanent. Our opponent, or I'm sorry, let me reframe that. The controller of the permanent gets a 3/3 green beast token. 3/3 green beast creature token. We don't care. It's just a 3/3 token. Getting rid of any permanent at instant speed for 2 and a green is so powerful. So powerful indeed that they actually created the spell again, but this time they turned it white and called it Generous Gift. They changed the creature from beast to elephant, but everything else is still the same. 2 and 1 white mana as opposed to 2 and a green. But the most important part is destroy target permanent. Again, we don't care about the token. And the last removal spell is 1 copy of Chaos Warp, 2 and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. There are times, there are temptations where you want to cast this on one of your own permanents and hope that you can get something into play that would help to move your game plan forward. Let me tell you, don't try that with this spell. We do not have tons and tons of game-breaking creatures in this deck. We are more instant and sorcery. Use the Chaos Warp on your opponents. Just use it on your opponents. All right, and the following group of spells, these are our mana ramp spells. Now, Golos' ability is not a cheap ability to activate. We're looking at 2 in Wooburg colors. And each time Golos enters the battlefield, we do get to search our library for a land and put it into play tapped. More on those lands to come. However, we need to make sure that we can use that 7 mana. But before we can even use it, we got to make sure that we can generate it. Now, we've already seen a couple of spells already throughout this deck that will help us to get more mana, like the Nyx Bloom Ancient and the Zendikar Resurgent. These ramp spells are going to put us over the top. There are 15 of them. Yes, there are 15 ramp spells, and that's before we showcase the 39 different lands we're including in this deck. Like I said, big mana deck. So let's start pulling out these mana ramps. Let's get it on, folks. Here we go. Mana Crypt. You know what it does. It costs us nothing but probably some life. And if you are a 20% accurate coin flipper such as me, it's probably going to cost you a lot of life. But it gives you 2 colorless mana, and it helps to fill that first requirement of Golos' activated ability. Another artifact that can do that a lot safer, and probably the best one in our format, is Soul Ring. 1 colorless mana, turn it sideways for 2 colorless mana. Alright, the next artifact spell is going to be Arcane Signet. Who does not want to include in this deck, for the purposes of our 5-color commander, an artifact that turns sideways for 1 mana of any color for the cost of just 2? Alright, shifting away momentarily from our mana rocks, 1 copy of Farseek, 1 and a green at sorcery speed. Search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, and put that onto the battlefield tapped. Notice it does not say basic. It also does not say forest, so do not try to put a basic forest into play. All right, so there's going to be more to talk about Farseek when we get to the lands, but keep in mind that it says plains, islands, swamp, or mountain, and it does not say it has to be a basic. All right, shifting back to our artifact ramp, we have Chromatic Lantern. 3 casting costs, lands we control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, because look at, we got to get those Wooburg colors, folks. You see, there's every one, and if we want to activate Golos more than once per turn, well, we got to make sure we hit those mana colors. Lands we control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and we can do the same thing with Chromatic Lantern. Next up, now this one may be considered a little bit of a cheat, but we also have to consider the very real possibility that some of the 24 big mana spells that we have included in the 99 are going to end up in our hand. We don't really want to invest all of the mana that it takes to cast those spells, because we want to focus on generating that mana or channeling that mana into Golos. So as a way in which to cheat those spells into play, which, let's be honest, is the purpose of this deck, we're going to include a copy of Fist of Suns. It's an artifact for 3. We may pay Wooburg rather than the mana cost for spells that we cast. So if we have, for example, if we have a Blightsteel Colossus in our hand, all we have to do is pay Wooburg and put it into play. This is a way in which to hedge against the potential inevitability of drawing those big mana spells when we would much rather prefer they stay in the library. All right, CMC of 4, another mana ramp. We have Skyshroud Claim, 3 and a green. Search our library for up to 2 forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, and then shuffle our library. Notice this says forest cards. They do not have to be basic lands. Again, more on the lands to come. Another ramp spell, but maybe not one that you're expecting, seeing how so much that we've dealt with so far has to do with our mana rocks and our fetching spells. This one is Smothering Tithe, 3 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. My experience is they never do. If the player doesn't, we create a treasure token. Now, treasure is we tap, we sack 1 mana of any color, so it's not a recurable source of mana ramping. However, if there's a lot of card draw going on, those treasure tokens pile up quickly, and it may give our opponents a second thought by casting some big-time draw spells, because they're going to have to be taxed, or they're going to put so many more treasure tokens into play, and if we have Golos in play at the same time, well, that could be game over. All right, next up with another mana cost of 4, we have Wilderness Reclamation. 3 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of our end step, we untap all lands we control. This can help us out in a lot of different ways, particularly if we have any of our flash enabling effects in play. We can tap out, hoping that our opponents do not spot remove Wilderness Reclamation. We can tap out, utilize Golos' ability as much as we can during our turn, get to our end step, untap all those lands, and just wait to do it again during one of our opponent's turns. All right, up to CMC of 5, and this time it's going to be Hour of Promise. 4 and a green, we search our library for up to 2 land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then we shuffle our library. The next ability won't really matter for us because we won't control any desert, so we won't be able to create any 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Now this is any 2 lands. It's not specific to a land type. So Hour of Promise, if we invest the 5 mana into Hour of Promise, we want to make sure that the lands that we get are definitely either helping to fix the mana that we desperately need fixed, or we're selecting a couple of lands that, well, let's be honest, may give us the ability to ramp so far ahead of our opponents and cast Golos so much sooner that you just get a look around the table that says good game. The 2 lands that come to mind, and I'll foreshadow them a little bit, we'll give you a couple of spoilers right here: Ancient Tomb and Temple of the False God. All right, another CMC of 5. This time we're going creature. That's right, it's going to be our first creature spell considered in our ramp, and that is going to be Gigantha. 4 in Gruul colors for a 5/5 elemental elk. It does have the companion ability, but we're not playing it as a commander, so we'll skip right past that. And we look down at the very bottom to say, tap, add Wooburg, a white, blue, black, red, green. This mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. You don't have to worry about that, Gigantha, because our commander, Zoop, has a Wooburg activated ability. Of course, we have the two generic mana, but we don't have to worry about that because the Wooburg can be generated just by turning Gigantha sideways. Can you imagine if we had Gigantha in play and we also had the Nyxbloom Ancient and we tap Gigantha for triple Wooburg and all we need is 6 generic mana to activate Golos 3 times? It can happen, folks. It is a beautiful thing, and probably another of the litany of reasons why I have to retire this deck. Like I said before, if your LGS is open to continuing to play with Golos, if your metagame is, if your playgroup is, great. Here is a great deck tech for you. For me, this is a Requiem for Golos. Another CMC of 5. We have Mirari's Wake. 3 in Selesnya colors for this enchantment. Creatures we control get +1/+1, and whenever we tap a land for mana, we add 1 mana to our mana pool of any type that land produced. So, in the earlier example, we're not going to necessarily use Gigantha, but for Mirari's Wake, if we have that in play, and we tap out for our Wooburg to activate Golos once, well, we're going to get double Wooburg if we have Mirari's Wake in play. And also, let's not look too far past that. Creatures we control get +1/+1. As you've seen throughout this deck tech so far, we have a litany of spells that create monstrous amounts of creature tokens. Stormherd and Army of the Damned come to mind. Those creatures, with this in play, maybe we also have Leshnorn in play, can give us a creature token army that should be fit for wiping out all of our opponents. All right, just 3 ramp spells remaining, and this last one is the last of a mana value of 5. It is Seedborn Muse. 3 and 2 green for a 2/4 spirit. We untap all permanents we control during each other player's untap step. Now, imagine we've got all the mana we need. Imagine we have Golos in play. Imagine we have Seedborn Muse in play. And imagine we have a Flash Enabler in play. Just think about what we can do all the way around the board during an entire round of turns with that little dynamic engine in play. Yeah, it's a thing of beauty, MTG BC. I encourage you to give it a try if you can find a willing party. All right, CMC of 6, we have an enchantment here. It is Mana Reflection, 4 and 2 green. If we tap a permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. So, let me tickle your fancies by saying another scenario that could be so possible in this deck, so much so that I've done it multiple times. You have Nyxbloom Ancient in play. You have Mana Reflection in play. You have Gigantha in play. Tap Gigantha, yeah, for 30 Wooburg. 6x Wooburg. That's just the time that our opponents just say, good game, let's play another. And yet another reason why I can no longer play with this deck. Oh, Golos, we're going to miss you. And our last ramp spell for this subset of the video, it's a CMC of 7, and it's going to pull everything together and make sure that in its presence, we will always be able to activate Golos' ability from a mana fixing standpoint, and that is going to be Chromatic Orrery. It's an artifact for 7. We may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. We can tap it for 5 colorless mana, which for the purposes of this deck, particularly when we're talking about activating Golos' ability, we can just consider this as tap for Wooburg, because we're going to channel that mana right into Golos' activated ability. And on a lighter note, we can pay 5, tap Chromatic Orrery, and draw a card for each color among permanents we control. This ability is not used too often in this deck because we do not have a great deal of permanents out in play other than our lands and mana rocks. There's the occasional enchantments, the occasional creature that we might be able to get some value out of. However, don't make any mistake about it. Chromatic Orrery is included in this deck because of its ability to bend and fix the mana. Plus, we can tap it and get 5 colorless mana that we can use for any colors we want. And again, if you think back to the scenario when we're talking about Mana Reflection and Nyxbloom Ancient, consider this being Giganta option number 2, but the mana created is a lot more versatile because we can use it to pay generic costs. Chromatic Orrery takes all of the mana fixing, encapsulate it into one artifact, and make sure that we will always be able to activate Golos' ability as many times as possible, with the only limitation, the only restriction being how much mana do we have. And now we conclude this deck tech and Requiem with a look at the land base that's been installed in our 5-color Golos deck. We are playing a true singleton EDH deck with this 99, and that means that there are no 2 copies of the same card. So that entails that we only have 1 of each basic land: 1 plains, 1 island, 1 swamp, 1 mountain, and 1 forest. 5 basics, a true singleton deck. We want to make sure that we can maximize the ways that we can fix Golos' colors as frequently as possible, because the entire deck is based on activating his ability. The next 5 lands, we're playing with 1 copy of each of the 5 triomes: the Indatha, the Rogwan, the Zagoth, the Savai, and the Ketrium. When searching for lands, as we kind of reflect back during the time that we were examining the ramp spells, particularly with Farseek, we want to make sure that our first early targets are the triomes. Yes, they will come into play tapped, which is a detriment. However, they're highly fetchable, and they give us 1 of any of the 3 colors we need to activate Golos. So early in mid-game, if we're fetching for our lands, targets 1 through 5, well, those are going to be our triomes. Some additional fetchable targets are going to include 1 of any of the 10 shock lands included in the 99 of this deck, and they're all here. We have our Azorius, we've got Dimir here, we've got Rakdos, we've got Gruul, we've got Selesnya, we have Orzhov, Boros, Izzet, Simic, and Golgari. All 10 2-color combinations, all 10 shock lands waiting to be fetched out onto the battlefield and then turned sideways to activate Golos' ability. Now, we've been saying the word fetch an awful lot, and we're not just talking about Farseek, folks. We're not just talking about Skyshroud Claim, which go for the triomes. We are also talking about the fetch lands that are included in the 99 of this build, and we are going to play with all 10 fetch lands. We have the Flooded Strand, we have our Polluted Delta, we have the Bloodstained Mire, the Wooded Foothills, the Windswept Heath, the Marsh Flats, the Arid Mesa, the Scalding Tarn, the Misty Rainforest, and of course the Verdant Catacombs. Turn 1 play, if we have a fetch land in our hand, should always be right into a triome. All right, and lastly, we have another subset of lands that we're going to talk about, some of which are going to help smooth out the mana, some of which are going to be included in the 99 of this build, simply based upon their utility. We'll get to those after we talk about our 5-color options. And of course, if we're playing a 5-color deck, we must include the best land in our format, 1 copy of Command Tower. That is land number 1 in this Golos build. Next up, we're going to play with a copy of Cascading Cataracts. It's a land that's indestructible. It taps for a colorless mana, yes. However, if needed, we can tap 5 and tap this and add 5 mana in any combination of colors to our mana pool. So if we're struggling with fixing our lands, we can use some of our artifact ramp to channel into Cascading Cataracts to tap it to get the WooBird colors that we need to activate Golos' ability. And if we're going to include Cascading Cataracts in the 99, then we might as well play with Cascading Cataracts Light, and that's going to be Crystal Quarry. It taps for a colorless mana. It is not indestructible, however, but it does have the ability to throw 5 mana into it, turn it sideways to produce WooBird colors. Both Cascading Cataracts and Crystal Quarries are very good targets for Golos' first enter the battlefield trigger. Maybe not target 1 or target 2, but they very well could be. All right, now let's talk about some of our utility lands. Now, up to this point, you know that Flash is a very important feature in this deck, so we're going to include some lands that can also enable our spells to have Flash. One of which is going to be Alchemist's Refuge. It taps for a colorless, but we can pay Simic colors, tap the Refuge, and we may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had Flash. So we could have this land in play, and as long as we have the mana to activate it and activate Golos' ability, and if you don't think we can, then what's wrong, which is because you should check out the mana ramp section of this deck tech once more. Alchemist's Refuge will help to give us additional redundancy to the Flash mechanic that's so important for making this deck as powerful as it is. And if we're going to include Alchemist's Refuge, we might as well include Alchemist's Refuge Light, which is going to be Emergence Zone. It taps for a colorless mana, but we can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it, and we may cast spells this turn as though they had Flash. Now, the Flash enabling from Emergence Zone is a one-time shot, because we're going to have to sacrifice the land and able to get that Flash mechanic for 1 turn. However, if it is the game-ending and game-winning turn, then we can part having one of our choice pieces of real estate hitting the yard. All right, now we alluded to earlier when we were specifically talking about a particular ramp spell, Promise of Tomorrow. That's for 4 and 1 green that we can search our library for 2 cards. To search our library for 2 lands and put them into play. Well, these are most likely not only the 2 lands that we would search for when thinking about casting Promise for Tomorrow, but it's also one of the lands that we can highly consider tutoring out when we cast Golo when he enters the battlefield for the first time. Golos only has a casting cost of 5, so if we're lucky enough to already have our WooBird 5 fixed by the time that we cast Golos, then seeking out a Temple of the False God or an Ancient Tomb and getting that into play tapped, that will allow us on our next turn to utilize that 5 WooBird mana that we used to cast Golos and to tap a Temple or an Ancient Tomb to activate Golos' ability right away if needed. So these 2 lands are highly fetchable targets for Promise of Tomorrow and for Golos himself. All right, we're down to just 2 more utility lands, and then we can bring this deck tech and Requiem to a close. Number 98 in the deck, well, that's just a way in which to make sure that any additional cards beyond 7 that we get into our hand stay in our hand, and that's going to be Reliquary Tower. I am a fan of this land. I try to include it in decks where I don't want to discard my cards into the graveyard. As you can see, we have a lot of very highly costed spells in this Golos build. And if by some chance we get past our maximum hand size of 7, and then we have hard decisions to make as to what to discard, I don't want to have to make that decision. I want to keep them in my hand. And because of the high level of fetching, the high level of fixing this 99 card deck already has with respect to the ramp spells and the lands we've already talked about, including a utility card that really only taps for 1 colorless mana and gives us no maximum hand size, I can justify and rationalize including it in the 99 as a way in which to preserve our hand if by some reason we have more than 7 cards. All right, and this is it, card number 99 in the 99. And it can easily be considered another one of our win conditions. Now, earlier when we were talking about this build being a true singleton build and only including 1 copy of each of the basic lands, well, that was a little bit of foreshadowing for the last card we're going to talk about, and that's going to be Field of the Dead. It ETB's tapped. It taps for a colorless mana. However, whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters a battlefield under our control, if we control 7 or more lands with different names, we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. As long as we have at least 7 lands, that's not going to be a problem because, as I said earlier, this is a singleton deck. We have no lands with the same name. So for the purposes of our Golos build, Field of the Dead really reads as whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under our control, as long as we control 7 or more lands, we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Mid-game, late game, when the game is starting to stretch out, resources are thin, and you're plopping down a fetch land and then fetching for another land, and you're creating more and more zombie creature tokens, and they start to swarm the board, you'll know why we went to the painstaking level of making sure that we have as much mana fixing and mana ramp as possible to include Field of the Dead with the justification of we have we have enough to fix our mana and enough ramping it out that including an alternate win condition in the form of a land that only produces colorless mana, well, we are able to get by doing that. And I can attest to the power of this card mid to late game when all other resources are taxed. Field of the Dead can win so many games just by being on the battlefield. And having 38 other lands with different names, that's just the icing on the cake. All right, MTG BC. I have poured my heart into this Requiem for Golos. It is a deck that has brought me many, many wins during the time of its construction. Now, I pass this on to you, the MTG Burgeoning community. By the time you view this deck will have been disassembled. No longer will I be able to carry this in my deck tech catalog, or no longer will I be able to carry this in my deck catalog, for I have nowhere left to play. However, by passing it on to you, maybe your metagame or your playgroup or your LGS will welcome Golos into it like mine have not. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.